Hey y'all, this is Rachel Hernandez, aka Mobile Home Girl of adventuresofmobilehomes.com. Thank you so much for joining me here on another episode of the podcast. Today, I have a very good podcaster and real estate investor friend with me. His name is Dan Lane, and his podcast is the Rental Income Podcast. And I was just talking to Dan, and he told me, like, I was on his podcast years ago, pretty much almost a decade ago. I don't even remember that. And today he is going to talk about landlording tips for mobile home investors. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dan.
Hey, Rachel, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast, Dan. I feel that it has been so long. I didn't even know it was almost 10 years ago
I
that I was
know.
actually on your podcast, Rental Income Podcast, and seems like you're going strong with that.
Time goes by just way too quick. I mean, it feels like it was yesterday, but yeah, it's been almost 10 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, with everyone here who's not familiar with you and what you do as a real estate investor, can you kind of tell us a little bit about your background as a real estate investor, how you got started, and what is your specialty?
Sure. Yeah. So I've always been interested in rental properties, but I just could never quite figure out how to get started. It just, I didn't understand the numbers. I didn't understand how everything worked, and I just didn't do anything. So for years, I just thought about it and thought about it and never took any action. And my wife and I decided that we were going to buy a new house. And I thought, well, I wonder if our old house would work as a rental. And my mortgage payment was 1,200 a month, and
Okay.
the rental comps from what I saw were about 2,200 a month. So I'm like, I don't see the downside. Let's rent this out. We'll make $1,000 a month and see how it goes. And I found a tenant pretty quickly, and I was hooked. I said, how can I do this again? But I didn't know any investors. I didn't know anybody that owned rental properties. I didn't know where to go. And I was really into podcasts. And I was looking for a show where they were interviewing just regular everyday people that were investing in rental properties. But all the shows were interviewing wholesalers or syndicators or people with 1,000 rentals. And I just wanted to hear from the regular everyday person. And so I decided to start the Rental Income Podcast basically to ask my questions. And so that's what I've been doing now. And it's been going great. And so basically what I do on the show is I find out the information that I want to know, and then I apply that to my business. So
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting. So you actually started as a podcaster. You had that first rental property. I mean, this was probably way back when you started podcasting. Do you know what year you started
Yeah, it was
podcasting,
10 years
Dan?
ago. It was 2014.
Oh my goodness. Congratulations.
Oh,
Congratulations.
thanks.
My podcast has been since the pandemic. So I'm 3 years in podcasting, going on my fourth
Wow.
year of podcasting. So I'm not there yet.
That's
But
still an accomplishment. I mean, most podcasts don't make it past a couple of episodes. So that's really good that you stuck with it for so long.
Thank you so much. I'm getting the hang of it for sure. But I do find it interesting how you started out, with your rental property, and then you started the podcast. And as you interviewed guests, that's how you learned about, the business and applied what you learned from your guests
Yeah.
to your business. So let's talk a little bit about your business. What primarily do you invest in, back then and versus now? And, let's talk about the landlording business that you have
Yeah.
right now, how it all works.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I'm doing, but before I get into that, there's so many different strategies, and from what I figured out, everything works. It's just a matter of figuring out what works for you. So what works for me could be totally different than someone listening, but what I like are single family houses in working class neighborhoods where I'm going to rent to a tenant that is going to want to stay for a long time. They're going to want to raise their family there. And they just want a nice, clean, affordable, safe place to live. So that's what I do. So my properties are all single families in working class slash blue collar type neighborhoods.
Okay. Okay, great. So I guess that's your comfort level
Yeah.
in terms of what you buy. So have you always stayed within that niche with the working class neighborhoods, or have you, in the beginning, like for me as a mobile home investor, I went into all different kinds of neighborhoods. Dan, I have an episode where I talk about my $2,000 nightmare. And basically, I worked in the neighborhood that didn't fit my personality, and that's why it became a nightmare.
Yeah.
But did you always stay within the working class background? And my other question is it because you're just more familiar with that type of clientele? You've worked with, that type of clientele in the past, or you just kind of stumbled upon that type of clientele?
Yeah.
How does that work?
So the third property that I bought was in kind of like a lower income area. Like I would maybe call it like a C class property. And it was an older house. It was over 100 years old. And it just wasn't in the best neighborhood. And so we had a lot of problems with the tenant. It's like if she had a car repair, maybe if she got a flat tire, she wouldn't have rent money that month. She just didn't have a lot of margin in her life. Um, and with the property being really old, there was just always maintenance stuff coming up. There was just always like weird things that would come up. So the property looked great on paper, but in actuality, it didn't perform as well as I thought it was. It still made money, but it was a lot of work for a little bit of money. And so from talking to people on the podcast, it seemed like a lot of the most successful people were investing in those working class neighborhoods. The people that were investing in the type of property that this property was, those landlords seemed to be like really hands on. Like they were calling their tenants constantly. They were in there fixing things. It was almost like a job where what I wanted was something that was going to be very hands off. I wanted to have a property manager, and to this day, I have a property manager that manages all my properties. And you just like most, or maybe I shouldn't say most, but a lot of property managers aren't really that good. And if you're looking for a property manager for a property that's going to be a lot of trouble, it's going to be harder than if you have a property where you have a tenant that just pays rent every month and the property's in good condition and a lot of things aren't coming up constantly. So for me, in what I was looking for, those like B class, like working class neighborhoods just seem to fit my goals better than to try to go into a different type of property. On the other end, like a really nice property that's brand new and a high end renter, that was just out of my budget. So the working class property just fit best for me and my goals.
Exactly. So you're talking the difference between your preference is really the class B type of properties, which is
Yeah,
kind of in the middle. It's not a class A where you're high end. And I will tell you, I deal in high end mobile home parks as a mobile home investor. And not everybody that you work in these high end parks are easy to work with.
yeah,
So you're talking class A, they could be high maintenance.
sure,
So I work in high end parks, but I look for low maintenance types of residents. So, and if I've got to go through how many people to find it, I will keep it on the market until I find the right person.
sure.
But on the other hand, you don't go into the class, C types of properties. And I think that was my $2,000 nightmare. I'm pretty sure that was a class C type of park because you're telling me probably the types of clientele it attracts It's just a different type of clientele. You may have issues with repair work or them, paying rent on time. And I am really a believer that the neighborhood is what attracts the clientele for sure.
Definitely. Definitely. And
So,
that
yeah,
$2,000 property like that probably on paper made a ton of money, right? I mean, it was like
right.
it's such a low price. So I think that's what attracts people is they think, oh, this is great. I'm buying a property for $2,000 and it's going to be an A class property where I'm going to attract the best tenants. But like you're not like you're when you're working at a really cheap property, you're attracting not always the best people. I mean, some of those tenants are going to be great, but it's going to be a lot more work with a cheaper
Exactly.
property.
Exactly. I actually had the air conditioning stolen from that. It was
Oh
just a
wow.
nightmare. And so I ended up losing money on that. And, it's in that episode. If anyone is interested, my $2,000 nightmare on the show. But so now, you've chosen the neighborhood. So let's talk about like looking for that ideal property in that class B neighborhood. What are some things that you look for when you're looking for a property? And let's talk about lead generation.
Sure.
Dan, how do
Yeah.
you how do you find these properties? Do you find them on your own? What lead generation techniques work for you? And also, do you work with a real estate agent?
Yeah. Honestly, it's nothing fancy what I'm doing. I'm not making cold calls or doing direct mail or knocking on doors. I work with a realtor and we find deals off the MLS, and the deals are out there. You just got to find them. I've also bought deals from wholesalers. So, anytime I meet someone that's wholesaling, I'll always tell them what I'm looking for and just hope that they think of me when they come across their next property. And there is a lot of good deals. Wholesalers they're putting in the work. They're doing the mailings, they're talking to a lot of people. And to me, it's worth it to pay a wholesaler their fee to do all that work. If they find a deal that's going to make sense for me, I'm happy that they're making money on it.
That
So
makes sense. That makes sense. So it seems like your technique is more networking. So my question would be the real estate agent seems like you're working with one. If you're working with more, let me know. How did you find an investor friendly agent to work with? And then also, did you go out and find these wholesalers or did they find you? And how did they find you in the first place?
yeah, so for the realtor, so I have access to my local MLS, and I was looking for a realtor that had um a lot of rental listings and also a lot of sales because I figured that would be somebody that was working with investors. Um, so that's a search that you can do easily in the MLS, but it's hard for someone that isn't licensed to do that. Um, so yeah, that's how I found my agent. But then finding wholesalers, it's all about just meeting other investors. So I go to local real estate meetups and I just talk to everybody and let them know what I'm looking for. And you never know who's gonna come across a deal that is gonna make sense. So yeah, so for wholesalers, it's all been networking and word of mouth.
That's great. That's great. So you've got your real estate agent and then these wholesalers. Now, there are a lot of people who say they're wholesalers, but they may not come across the best deals. So how are you able to weed, the more legitimate wholesalers that wouldn't waste your time versus the people who said they were wholesalers but they really didn't have anything yet, or did you just kind of say call me with a deal and this is my criteria, you gave them your criteria and then you just had to go through all those leads that, when they would call it they'd have something for you?
What I've done is I take everybody seriously. So, if someone's maybe never done a wholesale before, it doesn't mean that they're not going to come across a killer deal and it's going to be worth it. Most of the time, they're probably not. And they're probably, like, from what I've seen, I meet a lot of people at RIA clubs that say that they're wholesalers or they're getting started in wholesaling, and they never actually come across any deals. Um, but you never know. So yeah, I'll talk to anyone, and if they bring me a deal and it's not that great, yeah, I know exactly what I'm looking for, so I can tell that that's not going to be a great deal for me in 2 seconds. So it's not wasting a lot of time on my end. But if the deal looks good on paper, it's worth checking out more. Um, so yeah, I'll I treat everybody seriously, because you just never know where that next deal is going to come from.
That is so true. That is so true. Yeah, for me, I actually tend in the mobile home industry, I work more with it was funny because this week I actually had my contractor call me, my air conditioning contractor call me, and he wanted advice on a home he wanted to buy in a park from a customer. And he was asking me some advice about paperwork and how does he approach the park manager because he wants to rent it out. And I told him, like, they're not really going to let you rent it out. They want you to actually own or finance the deal, and it can't be a straight rental. All he wanted to do was rent out this mobile home in a community because I already know the park manager. He wanted to call me before. So he told me, then what are my options? I'm like, either you sell it for cash, you buy it from your customer, you sell it for cash, or you sell it owner financing. And then he asked me, "Hey, Rachel, what are you up to?" I'm like, "I'm wholesaling." And he's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "If you fix up this house and you want to, resell it for cash, let me know. I can help you, find a buyer." And he's like, "I think I'm going to do that actually." So, we may be JVing on that. And then it was so funny, Dan. He was like, hold on 1 second. I've got another. He was actually in the park outside because he knows these customers for years, right?
Mhm.
And we've done business together. I pay him. He's my he's my air conditioning contractor. And he's like, I've got a customer here. He's thinking about selling his home. If I get you all the information, take pictures. I'm like, yeah, just let me know. I can come over, do a market analysis. And he's like, yeah, can we work on this together and share the profits? I have no problem doing
Yeah,
that because
right.
as you know, Dan, the hardest part is finding the lead.
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, once you
Yeah, and
got
you,
the
you just
lead.
yeah, you never know where it's going to come from. So, yeah, talking to everybody is really the key, and just go into it knowing that every contact you make isn't going to lead to a deal, but you never know. Like, it may lead to a deal 5 years from now. So, yeah, I mean, just talk to everybody and let them know what you do.
Exactly, exactly. All right. So we talked about lead generation. Let's talk about your criteria. So I
Mhm.
know you invest in single family homes.
Yep.
Is there a specific number of bedrooms, bathrooms? How much work do you want on the home? We already talked about the neighborhoods. What is your investment criteria when you do talk to agents, wholesalers, and other investors when you're, out there talking with people for your
Sure. So
investing?
I'm looking for a 3 bedroom. I'd like to have a 2 bath. I do have a couple of 1 baths. But like a 3 bedroom, 2 bath is like the perfect property. I also own one 4 bedroom, but 3 2 is really kind of the target. I don't want to do a lot of work. Like, I really like properties that I can close on them and rent them out right away. If it needs maybe some paint or carpet, I'm not opposed to that. But I really like to get them rented out as quick as possible. Working with contractors can be frustrating, and it can also take a lot of time. You never know how long it's going to be before someone can start a job. So the the quicker I can rent the property out and start making money on it, the better it is for me. So I would rather not do any work.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I will say that the money is in finding properties that need a lot of work. So I know a lot of people that I've had on the podcast, they will buy properties that need a gut rehab, and they're really good about that, and they make a lot of money improving properties. But for me, like I would rather not get involved with that.
Me too. Me too. I'm all about cosmetics, Dan.
Yeah, right.
Remove and
Cosmetics are easy.
replace.
Yeah.
I put
Yeah.
a roof on. I've, exchanged a hot water heater, air conditioning, all kinds of things. But anything more, actually, my rat house, we actually had to take the old cabinets because they put in their old, new cabinets, which weren't so great. And I had to remove those, get my cabinet guy to put nicer cabinets, and it was ridiculous. They removed a wall. That was my rat house. That was fun. I went to eviction court for that 3 times, and the judge said, "Next time you're out, next time you come here to the tenant, you're out." 4th time she was out, so that was
Um,
it.
uh,
Funny, funny, funny. Good times. So, that's your investment criteria. Let's talk about, when you do have something that comes up. I guess you go through real estate agents, you go through wholesalers. So there's really not much that you specifically do, like face to face negotiating. So it's basically your wholesaler just tells you this is what, they think the home is worth, and then you work out a wholesale fee, and then your agent, I'm sure that your agent does the negotiating for you when you're writing offers and doing counters and all that. Is that how you
yeah.
basically negotiate and all
I
that?
mean,
Okay.
yeah, really, like my whole goal is I want this to be as passive as possible. So yeah, usually with wholesalers, they'll come to you with the price and say, this is the price, take it or leave it. Usually there's not too much room for negotiating. Sure, you can always try, and I always do, but most of the time, the price is the price. Um, with houses I bought off the MLS, it really just depends on the market. I'll always try to negotiate, but in this market today, you really can't. I mean, that they're just, a lot of properties are getting bid up that, if you come in low, you're just not going to get the property. But, I think it all comes down to your numbers. Like you got to figure out what can I pay for this property and have it cash flow. So I'm not going to pay more than, than I guess I'll pay the maximum for the property to work for me. Um, but yeah, but it's really like it's really pretty hands off for me, where the realtors and the wholesalers are finding the deals, and then my property manager manages the property. So yeah, really there isn't a whole lot for me to do other than to solve problems when problems come up.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Sounds great,
Yeah.
Dan. So my question is, once you get these deals, that come to you, do you work off their numbers? I know that you have access to the MLS, and I'm sure your agent or these wholesalers give you their numbers, but I'm suspecting you have to verify it through, and you have access to the MLS. Are there any other tools besides the MLS you use to do your due diligence when deals come across your desk?
Yeah, I don't trust numbers from anybody, especially wholesalers. I mean, there a lot of them are gonna underestimate how much work a property needs and overestimate the the rental comps. So yeah, I'll look on the MLS and get a good idea for what it would rent for. But I'm also buying in the same areas, so I kind of have a feeling for, like, when I look at a property, I can tell, okay, this is going to rent for this amount. Um, but yeah, so I'll look on the MLS and look on Zillow or Redfin, but yeah, really it's yeah, it's like taking in as much information as I can, and then making an estimate. And you never know for sure. I mean, you might think a property is going to rent for a certain amount, but then maybe it doesn't. Maybe maybe it's the winter and rents are maybe a little bit low, or there's more inventory on the market at that particular time, and you've got to lower your price. So it's not an exact science, um, but there's a range. So as long as I'm in that range, I'm usually pretty happy.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
You do what you can. You do what you
Right.
can. My next question is, when you're making a decision on how much you want to buy it for, how important is the tax assessment to you when it comes to the value of the property? Is it kind of close to the value, or is it completely off? I know it's different for every area, but I was just curious about that.
Yeah. I don't really consider that as when I'm figuring out the value of something. I don't really consider the tax value. A lot of times it's going to be lower than the market value. So around here anyway, in different areas it could be different, um but yeah, that's not something I'm looking at. Like I'm really looking at what's the market value of the property and what am I paying for it. But yeah, I guess I'll look at what's the tax bill, like maybe in a certain neighborhood or a certain part of town, maybe taxes are higher. So I'm gonna factor that into my analysis, that I need to make sure I'm budgeting for that extra taxes. But yeah, I really don't look at the tax assessment too much. Is that something you look at?
I actually do, actually.
Really? Okay.
And it's funny because I'm working a deal right now. It was referred to me by a mobile home dealership where the tax assessment, and this is personal property, Dan. This is a 2020 Clayton Homes, 3 bedroom, 2 bath. I believe it's 16 by 76. They only lived in it for 3 years. They're in the process, the seller's in the process of moving it. I mean, moving out of the home. It's on their own land because they bought a brand new mobile home from the dealership. And so they need to sell this. And they owe like about 76,000 on the home, and they're fine just selling it for what they owe. And I did a market analysis and I said, you could probably sell it for what you owe or a little bit more. And it's in excellent shape. They have a mortgage on it still, but it was assessed at 100 and almost $115,000 by the county. And I use that when it comes to when I'm doing wholesaling and helping sellers sell their mobile homes. When I bring in buyers, I'm like, hey, this is what the county is saying it's assessed at, you know, and I find that it's powerful on the selling end, more on the selling end, when I have that tax assessment. I mean, obviously, it's always what I think it really is subjective
Right, right.
because, I think it was like a 2005 mobile home. I actually wholesaled that. It was assessed at $60,000, right? And we sold it for close to 40,
Wow.
right? And the seller, got 30, and he's like, whatever you want to make. I know it was between 30 and 40. I sold it for 38. So I used that. It was powerful when I was on the selling end to help the seller sell the home, and we brought in a buyer. So it's so subjective though. And this is
Right,
personal property. It's not
right,
even
right,
attached to real estate.
right,
So
right.
it's
Yeah, and
amazing.
so I think, I think the big lesson there is you just got to look at your market, and because every area is different. Um, but for me, that's not something I look at. But yeah, but for you, I could see how that's an important thing to look at.
Exactly, exactly. So we talked about the values of the home. So once you know the values, let's talk about rent. I mean, obviously, before you purchase, the due diligence, the first part is what is the value of the home. The second part is the rental rate. How do you figure out the rental rate? Do you just look at the MLS, or again, do you just go to those same sites, Zillow, Redfin, or are there any other resources that you go
Yeah, like
to?
Zillow, and there's a site, Rentometer, that's pretty good. But it's like it's going to give you a ballpark, but like and then also, the opinion of my property manager, what they think it's going to rent for. Um, but one thing I will say with relying on a property manager is they always want to get it rented quickly. Like they're not necessarily looking out to make you the highest return possible. So the property manager I've noticed will tend to go a little bit low with their estimates. So um yeah, so I think yeah, so I'm looking at the MLS, I'm looking at Zillow, and then just my general market knowledge just from watching properties and seeing what they're renting for.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so once you got your, your numbers on the rental side and then also, what the home is worth and you put in the offer, let's talk about financing now. How are you financing these homes? Or are you paying cash? Or are you doing owner financing? How do you buy homes on the financing part
So
of
a
things?
couple of different ways. I've done regular bank financing where I put down 20%, which if someone's interested in mobile homes, that's probably different with like how do you finance with a mobile home? Like can you finance
Yes.
it?
You can actually. And I actually don't. I buy cash.
Mm.
I don't do owner financing. I know it's going to come make a comeback because interest rates are increasing very, slowly but steadily and with the economy and everything. But the way I buy is straight cash. But so with this seller that I'm working with who has this 2020 Clayton home on a piece of land, I actually, in terms of financing, because they're willing to sell it for what they owe, I'm actually going to be bringing in a lender, 21st Mortgage, and they have Vanderbilt. But the dealership that I'm working with said 21st Mortgage is just more, I guess, friendlier in their opinion, and to bring in that financing for the new buyer. So I know how financing works for the mobile homes. I never actually bought a mobile home on owner financing. I know it's there, but I haven't done it myself. I've just bought straight cash. But I know other investors who've actually, I don't recommend this, by using a home equity line of credit against their home, for mobile homes. And Dan, I don't know if you know this, but I actually bought 3 mobile homes on credit card.
Wow.
Yes, but I knew that I was getting a lot of money from the sale of some of my single family homes. So, I bought it on credit card. And then once I got the money from the sale of the single family homes, I actually paid off the credit card right
Okay.
away.
Yeah.
But on the mobile home side, I've heard people getting personal loans, doing the home equity, owner financing, bringing in a private lender. I mean, Lonnie Scruggs, the godfather of mobile home investing. I know one of his students, and he did like 45 deals, Dan, using a private lender.
Wow.
And the private lender, all they wanted is 10%. And Lonnie's student charged, 12 and 3/4. And he
Mm.
made money on the spread,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
So there's different ways of financing. So I'm really curious in terms of how you buy in terms of the financing. Have you ever bought on owner financing yourself?
Oh, I've
Or
never done owner financing. I would, but I just haven't come across an opportunity like that. I have used a line of credit on my house, a HELOC, for down payments and also to buy the to buy properties outright, and then I pay that down with the rent and then use it again. Um, so yeah, basically, it's leverage is really kind of a shortcut to building wealth. I mean, if you have cash, I mean that's a great way to go. But um, you know, for for $100,000 house, like if you save up cash to buy that, it's going to take forever. So using whatever you can to get in the property, I think is a smart move. I mean, whether it's a credit card like you said or a HELOC, it's like, and once that property appreciates a little bit, you can refinance, take some cash out and pay off your line of credit, pay off your credit card. Um, so yeah, I think, for someone listening, do whatever you have to do to get into the property. And, as long as the numbers make sense and you can you cover your debt payment with the, with the, with the rent, I think it makes sense to
Yes.
use leverage.
Exactly, exactly. Would you recommend hard money lenders? You know how people they buy hard money. Obviously, it has to be 70% of the value, depending on the hard money lender, minus repairs. But would you recommend hard money lending, fix it up, and then refinance? Have you ever gone that route using hard money lenders
I
for any of your properties?
I haven't. I've had a lot of people on the podcast that have. Um, I think you got to look at the numbers and see if it makes sense. Um, a lot of times it doesn't make sense. To pay 12 or 15% interest to a hard money lender. A lot of times it just doesn't make sense. But if it's a really good deal and the numbers make sense and you need to close quickly, hard money can be a great tool to get into that deal. Um, I just haven't personally needed to use hard money, but I'd be open to it. Absolutely.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
How about private lenders? Have you, or are you, since you're seasoned now, would you be open to working with private lenders, or
Yeah.
have you
Yeah. And
already?
actually I have worked with one private lender, but yeah, I would absolutely be into it. I think with a private lender, you just have to be really, really careful that you're not going to lose money for your lender. I think you just got to really know what you're doing and just protect their money. Even if you lose money on the deal, make sure you get the money back to the private lender. Um, so yeah, I would definitely do more private lending too.
Exactly. That was one of the things that Lonnie's student had told me. And I think like his spread, I mean, it wasn't even that much. I think one of his deals, he only got $50, on the spread, but he would
Yeah.
put it in the repair account just in case.
Right.
That was what he had after he paid off the private lender. And I think, it was just for a couple years. The private lender was paid and then everything else came to him after he paid the
Mhm.
private lender. So
Yeah.
that's how he was able to do 45 Lonnie deals,
Right.
and made money on the spread. Okay, so let's talk about once you close, you close on the home and obviously it is vacant. Have you ever actually bought a home that wasn't vacant that had tenants in it? And if you have, any advice for anyone out there?
I haven't. But I think that you should really check out the tenants to make sure that they're actually paying. I think there's a lot of risk that you maybe have a landlord that doesn't know how to evict or doesn't want to evict or has some kind of issue there. So I think you really want to verify that the tenants are actually paying. Um, but yeah, I think I would buy a deal with tenants in there as long as they were paying, or if they weren't paying, if I was buying the property cheap enough, I would go through the eviction. But I think you got to look at your state laws. And in some states, you're going to be able to evict pretty easily. In other states, it might take you a year or two. So you got to be careful with that. Um,
I believe it.
yeah,
For
yeah.
sure. For sure. Okay, so you close on the deal and the home is ready to fix up. Let's talk about, at this point, you told me that you bring in property managers, on the deal. Do they kind of take over? Do they have their own crew to do make readies, or do you actually have your own contractors and then you bring in the property managers after the home is ready? How does that work?
So in a perfect world, there is literally nothing to do. I mean, like that and I've bought several properties like this where I close on it, and as I'm signing the paperwork, the property manager is over at the property taking pictures and getting things ready. Um, the last property I bought, we had to do like small stuff like paint, flooring. There was a couple of small things to fix, and that took about a month to get everything ready. Um, but yeah, we'll get started on that as soon as we possibly can. And yeah, get everything turned around because I just do not want the property to sit vacant. I mean, every day that it's sitting vacant, you're losing money. So I want to get those properties fixed up and on the market as soon as possible. Because if it takes you a month to fix up the property, and then it takes you maybe another couple of weeks to find a good tenant, and then that tenant might have to give notice from wherever they're moving to, like you could be looking at a situation where you're vacant for 2 or 3 months. And I just I don't want to get involved in that. I really want to get the property rented as quick as possible. So
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly, because having that mortgage, obviously,
Yeah,
on
right.
the
Right.
home as well
Right.
too, that's the power, there's leverage there.
Right.
Now let's talk about the property manager. What is the percentage that they take in terms of their management fee? And do you pay them a management fee if the home is vacant? How does that work?
So it's going to vary by area, somewhere between like 8 and 10 or maybe 11 or 12%. I pay 10% to my property manager, and they don't charge anything when it's vacant. So whenever I get paid, say if the rent is $1,000, they'll take out 10%, that's $100, and they'll send me 900. But yeah, when it's empty, it doesn't cost anything. So that incentivizes them to want to get it rented out. I think it's dangerous if they're getting the money, whether it's rented or not. In that case, there's no incentive for them to start getting paid again. And then they also charge, most managers are going to charge a placement fee. So when you have a new tenant, so my manager takes the first month's rent payment as their fee to place a tenant. But I know some managers will maybe charge a half a month's rent, but yeah, they my manager charges 1 month.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. That makes sense. So, I mean, it sounds like you're pretty hands off. You bring in the property manager. In terms of marketing for a tenant, is this something that they do, or are you involved in the marketing? Or if not, do they just bring you prospective applicants? How does that whole process work
Yeah.
in, marketing for applicants and then finding applicants?
Yeah. So they put the properties up on the MLS. They put it on Zillow, and then also they're a pretty big management company, so they have a lot of tenants that are going to them looking for properties. So they get a lot of leads off their website, but that's not something that I personally need to be involved with. Like they put it on the market, they do all the showings, and when so we have a set criteria, and when they find someone that meets the criteria, they'll run it by me. But the thing is, like, once someone meets the criteria, we'll rent to them, unless there's some kind of weird thing where maybe their income is really good but their credit is really bad. Like they're gonna run that by me, and I'll have to make a judgment call that maybe they're not good at paying their bills, or maybe they are good at paying the bills but they had a medical issue and that just destroyed their credit, but their income's good and they're getting back on track again. That's somebody that I would rent to. But if someone has great income but they've had 3 evictions, I'm going to pass on them all day. So so a lot of times it kind of, you have your criteria, but people don't always fit neatly into it.
Exactly, exactly. It's not perfect all the
Right.
time. So
Right.
let's talk about this criteria, at a minimum, I mean, I know it's different for, every case of, it's not going to be perfect like you said. What is on a general scale this criteria that you have? And then my second question is, do you take pets? And if you do, what are your restrictions on those?
All right. So for the pets, I have no problem with pets. My insurance won't let me have dangerous breeds, so like a pit bull or a Rottweiler. But other than that, I have no problem with pets, and they actually can be very profitable. We charge extra pet rent when someone has pets. So I mean that can really start to add up and make a property even more profitable. You just want to be careful that the pet isn't going to destroy the property. Um, and there's really no way to predict that, I think. I mean, I don't know. Like, have you found a way to tell if a pet is going to be good or not good?
I don't meet the pet. Actually, it's with the parks and
Okay.
it's their insurance as well too. So they don't take Rottweilers, they don't take pit bulls. And it's so funny. There's this one park I can think of, and you, I kid you not. This pet policy is hilarious. You're gonna think it's funny, Dan. The pet cannot be more than 30 pounds, and they actually weigh the pet.
Really?
So it's different for every
Yeah.
community because I work in these communities. So I just go with what their rules are. And obviously, if someone's going to be a resident in this community, they have to follow their rules, which are my rules as well, too. And sometimes there is a pet deposit. Do you charge a pet deposit?
No, I don't do a deposit. I probably should, but what I do is charge extra rent. So we charge an extra $75 for a pet. And I just figure, over a year, that's almost $1,000. They're probably not going to cause $1,000 in damage. You know, maybe there'll be some little things to fix here and there, but it's always worked out. I haven't had a dog that's destroyed a property. So I'm comfortable with the risk. And also, like, a lot of tenants have pets and a lot of landlords won't take pets. So I feel like that opens me up to a bigger pool of tenants. And once I get them, it's going to be harder for them to leave. So it really it works out great for them and it works out great for me. So I'm fine with it. Now, who knows? I mean, maybe if I have a dog that destroys a property and we're talking here in a year or two, maybe I'll change my mind. But for now, it's worked out great.
Yeah, there, Dan, you're completely right. There is
Yeah.
actually a niche for taking larger dogs. I mean, obviously in the communities they can't take because of the insurance those breeds, but larger dogs that are not with those breeds, I've had so many people call me in the past, and I haven't had issues with people with larger dogs. They just have to be inside the home,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
follow the community. So my next question is, once you have your property manager and they've got some applicants, how do you determine which applicant, or how does the application process work? Do you just have a bunch of applicants apply for the home and then you choose, or does your property manager just tell you, we've got 5 applicants. I feel better about this one versus this one. And and then they apply. And how does that work in terms of the selection process?
So you got to be really careful that you're not discriminating or discriminating and not realize it. So what we do is take the first person. So the first person that qualifies, we take. Um, Sometimes we'll get 3 or 4 applications that'll come in at the same time, and at that point, we'll look at it and figure out what the best person is. Um, but yeah, you just have to be careful that you're not discriminating and not realizing it. So, um,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. That
So,
that makes sense.
yeah.
So when you do select an applicant, what do you say to the other applicant, or what is your property manager? Do they just say you just weren't selected, and if they wanted to know why, does your property manager get into that, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think they just say we've gone with someone else and they don't get into any details. Yeah, I think it's the less you say in that situation, the better off you're gonna be.
That's what
Um,
the parks do as well too.
yeah,
They just
yeah,
say you just weren't, we went with another applicant, or you just were not qualified.
right.
Those are the
And
two
I think
things.
99% of tenants are gonna be okay with that. They're not gonna question you on it. But yeah, I think the less you say, the better.
That's a good tip,
Yeah.
y'all. So, that's why we're here,
Yeah.
getting these landlording tips. All right. So once you do find an applicant, does your property manager, actually, I did have a question. Do you meet the applicant in before they get approved, or is it just basically what you see on paper and your property manager just bringing you, these applicants and what you say, in
No,
person or over the phone? Do you actually meet them?
no, I don't even know the names of my tenants. Yeah, I've never met any of my tenants, except for the first property that I rented out. The property manager has met them, but yeah, I don't meet them, and I have no interest in meeting them. I
Okay.
just I just I just want to get paid every month, and it really doesn't it doesn't yeah, that's not something I want to get involved with. It I don't want them to know who I am. They, as far as they know, the property manager might be the owner of the property. They have no idea that Dan Lane is out there. So,
Yeah, clean and simple,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
that's a topic that we talk about all the time as investors. Do we tell them I'm the owner of the property, or do I just tell them, I'm managing the property? I tend to say I'm managing the property versus I'm the owner. They're not going to look it up. I mean, they can
No, yeah.
try, but it's in the company name.
Right, right.
So basically, that's my way of doing things. But I have a mentor, and she basically tells him, "No, I'm the owner of the property," and it's worked out for her. So it really depends
Yeah, it really
on,
depends. Yep.
the investor. So once you have the applicant, they get approved, everything. I guess the property manager takes it from there. Do they do like a walkthrough with them and then have the checklist and all that? And also, my other question is, once they do the paperwork for the lease, do you have a year lease or do you do month to month? How does that work?
Yeah, I like year leases. I know I've had a lot of people on the podcast that have had a lot of success with month to month leases, because if you have a bad tenant that is maybe causing a lot of trouble, but they're paying on time, it can be really difficult to get rid of them. Where if you have them on a month to month lease, you can just give them 30 days notice, and it's a cleaner process. Um, for my tenants, I think we've done enough work up front, making sure that they're qualified and checking their landlord references, that I haven't had a problem with any tenants. And we've had a couple of evictions over the years, but most tenants are pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of good, hardworking people out there that they just want a nice place to live, and that's really what I'm looking for. So,
Exactly. Exactly. All right. So they sign the paperwork, they do the lease, they move in. I'm sure they give a deposit and then first month's rent, right?
yeah.
So they move in. How do you, I guess it would be your agent who handles repair orders and I mean, I'm thinking that's in the lease. And if anything does need to get repaired, how do you work with your property manager in terms of what you approve and what you don't approve? Or do you give your property manager approval of some things, but not others in terms of fixing up the home?
Yeah, so I mean, I've really set things up to be very passive. So like if there's a leaky faucet, like I don't want to know about it. I just want them to fix it. So for minor things, they'll just take care of it, and I'll just see it on the statement that there was a leaky faucet and they paid a handyman to go over there and fix it. If there's something big that goes on, and by big, I think it's a $500 threshold. If it's over $500, they'll tell me ahead of time. But most of the time, they're just giving me a heads up. But like if there's a hot water heater that needs to be replaced, it needs to be replaced. And, there's probably water that needs to be picked up, and it's not something that we can shop around for. We just need to get it replaced right away. So in that case, they'll tell me, "Hey, the hot water heater needed to be replaced." We went over there and we did it, and everything's done. So it's more of just like a courtesy heads up. But if there's something, like we had a problem one time with a driveway that the tenant was complaining that I don't know. I think the driveway was crumbling in an area, and they got me a quote to replace the driveway, and then they got me a quote to just patch up where the problem was.
That's
And
what
they,
parks do. They
yeah,
patch up usually.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so they said, "What do you want to do? Do you want to replace the driveway or patch it up?" So my answer is patch up. Like I don't, I that's cheaper. If we need to replace the driveway at somewhere down the road, we'll deal with that then. But I think we can make the tenant happy with a cheap patch. So that's what
Exactly.
we did. Um, but yeah, so I think you gotta watch the property manager because it's not their money, and to them, they don't care if it's replaced or if it's patched. They're not always going to pick the cheaper option. So that's where you got to kind of watch them. You got to manage your manager to make sure that they're doing things the way that you want them done.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, that's some good information. We're almost at the end of the interview. I've just got a couple other questions and then we'll wrap up, Dan.
Sure.
My other question is, let's talk about evictions. When it comes to evictions, is this something I'm thinking your property manager does, or do you actually hire an attorney, or do you DIY it? Have you ever, handled an eviction yourself? How do you deal with evictions?
I haven't. Yeah, the manager does all that. So yeah, it's like when somebody gets behind in rent, the first thing I want them to do is to figure out what's going on and to work with the tenant. So if if maybe they had a big bill or they had something happen or they missed a week of work because they were sick and they're going to be a little bit delayed paying rent, as long as they communicate that, hey, we're behind and here's our plan to get caught up, I'm going to work with them. Like I'd rather not evict them. But the second that they go dark and they stop communicating, or if they make a plan to get caught up on rent, but they don't do what they said they were going to do, then we move forward with the eviction. But the eviction is really the last resort for me. I know a lot of people will default to the eviction if they don't pay by the fifth, they're starting the paperwork. But for me, I'd rather work with the tenants and avoid the eviction if possible.
Okay, that's a good perspective to have. Yes, I know it's different for everyone. I know the parks that well, I work in five-star parks and it's pretty much by the 5th you get your notice and then I think they give them till the 10th. If not, they go file and that's it. So I
Okay.
have no control over that. So even if I have a resident calling me, I'm like, well, there's nothing I can do, you
Right.
know.
Right.
You're paying me on time, but if you don't pay the lot rent because lot rents are going up nationwide in these communities, there's really nothing I can do
Right.
on
Right.
that. So, and I have it in my agreement if you don't abide by the park's rules and regulations, then you lose the home.
Right. Right.
So they know that going in. Okay, that's good to know in terms of
Yeah.
eviction. So you basically have the property manager deal with it and all that. So if someone does get evicted, once they get out, do you just have the property manager take it from there and just put someone in all over again? Or are
Yeah.
you more involved in
That
that process?
No, yeah, I'm really not involved at all. Like it's really it's they'll do everything. So once we get the property back, they'll get in there, figure out what needs to be done, and they'll coordinate. If it's just a cleaning, they'll get it cleaned. If things are broken, they'll get it fixed. Um, but yeah, they coordinate everything and get it done. So really, it's very hands off, and that's the way I like it. Like I don't, I'm busy doing other stuff. I don't want to be involved with anything with the rentals. Like I really like this is my way of making passive income. So
Yes, I
yeah,
understand. I
yeah,
understand. I'm actually the opposite. I'm pretty hands-on. I
yeah, and
DIY. I've
and
gone to
that
eviction court.
and that's the great thing with rentals. Like there's so many ways you can do it, and you're definitely more hands on, and I think that's great. But for me, like I have no interest in dealing with tenants, or I don't know how to fix anything. So if something breaks in a property, like I'm the last guy you want in there fixing it.
Exactly, exactly. I can completely relate
Yeah.
with you on that end. I actually have a love-hate relationship, being a landlord and all that. So that's probably one of the reasons. But I have to be involved because I'm working with the community. So
Sure.
that's the thing.
Sure.
And there's not many managers who actually manage mobile homes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
that's what I have to deal with. But anyways, we're getting towards the end. I wanted to get your thoughts on any advice you have for people who, they are a landlord or they want to be a landlord. For people, who are listening on the show, any tips that you can give them? What's the biggest mistake that you've made? What do you wish that you knew before that you now know then? What kind of advice do you have for people listening out there who are landlords who want to be landlords in the future and make passive income off of real estate?
I think there's two things that I think are really important. The first one is it's really important to build a circle of other investors that you can go to when you have problems. Like I've got some really good friends that are landlords that when I run into an issue or a day when I have four things that have gone bad with the properties and like I'm just ready to give up, like just having people that I can go to kind of talk me off the ledge and give me encouragement is so important. So I think building relationships with other landlords is so important. And the other bit of advice is to build a really good team, to make sure you have a good CPA, you have a good insurance person, good contractors, good realtors, like really have a strong group of people that you can lean on because you can't know everything, and you really need professionals to be there for you to help you out and make sure you're doing things right. So
That's a
yeah.
good tips, good information out there, Dan. Well, we're at the end of the interview. What resources, books? I know you have a podcast you recommend for people who want to learn more about landlording and just get better at landlording as a real estate investor.
Yeah, my show is Rental Income Podcast. We're on whatever platform you're listening to this show on. You can find it there. We're everywhere. And I put out a new show every Tuesday where we interview regular ordinary people that are buying rental properties and investing. And it's just, to me, it's really inspiring to hear what's possible with rentals. And it's yeah, so I know every week I get fired up just hearing these stories, and I'm sure your listeners will too. So definitely check it out if you're looking for another show to listen to.
Sounds good. And you also have a course. Let's talk about your course as well, too.
Yeah, so I have a course for beginners. It's called Rental Income for Beginners, and it basically just walks you through how to get started buying rental properties, from how to set up your financing, like how to figure out what types of properties you want to buy, how to find a good property manager. It walks you through step by step on how to get started. So, yeah, so you can check that out too. I've got information on my website at rentalincomepodcast.com.
Great, great, great. So everyone listening, go to rentalincomepodcast.com to get all the information, listen to the podcast, find out more about Dan's course as well too. Dan, do you do social media? Do you have any social media links you want to plug in before we
I
go?
really don't. I'm really bad about that. I really should do more social media, but yeah, I don't. Like really the podcast is really all you're going to get from me. So,
No problem. I'm sure people can find you.
yeah.
So, y'all check it out. All of the links to all the resources mentioned here in the episode and anything that we talked about will be in the episode show notes. So thank you, Dan, for coming on, taking time to give us some tips, landlording advice for, real estate investors, mobile home investors. Like I said, this can apply to mobile home investing, real estate investing, whatever niche that you're focused on for these landlording tips and advice. And if y'all have any questions for Dan, definitely check him out at rentalincomepodcast.com. Without further ado, thank you so much for coming on the show, Dan. This is Rachel Hernandez, aka Mobile Home Girl of the Adventures of Mobile Homes podcast, signing off. Thanks for tuning in.